There's a tiny organ sitting right in the center of your brain, roughly the size of a grain of rice, and it has been quietly running one of the most important operations in your entire body since the moment you were born. Most people never hear about it until something goes wrong. Some people never hear about it at all. But this small, pine-cone-shaped gland, nestled deep between the two hemispheres of your brain, resting in a groove where the two halves of the thalamus meet, produces a hormone so powerful that it regulates your sleep, your immune function, your mood, your aging process, and possibly your very perception of reality. It is called the pineal gland. And right now, in the majority of adults walking the earth, it is slowly turning to stone. That is not a metaphor. That is not exaggeration for dramatic effect. Scientists call it calcification. They have documented it in textbooks, in imaging studies, in autopsies, and in CT scans. Calcium and phosphorus crystals begin forming inside the gland, gradually hardening the tissue, steadily reducing the gland's ability to do what it was designed to do. By the time most people reach their 30s, the process is already well underway. By middle age, studies suggest that more than 60% of the adult population shows measurable calcification in their pineal gland. Some researchers have found calcification beginning as early as 17 years of age, not in old people, not in sick people, in teenagers. The question that should follow immediately, the one that doctors and researchers and ordinary people should all be asking in the same breath, is simply this. Why? Why is a gland so critical to human physiology calcifying at such a high rate, starting so young in so many people across so many different countries and cultures? Is it just aging? Is it something in the environment? Is it something we are doing to ourselves? Or is it, as some people online have come to believe, something that is being done to us, deliberately, systematically, quietly? The answer, when you follow the actual science rather than the speculation, is more complicated and more disturbing than either side of that debate usually admits. Let us start with what the pineal gland actually does, because it is impossible to understand the significance of its calcification without first understanding what you lose when it stops working. The pineal gland is your body's master clock. It receives information about light and darkness from the eyes through a pathway that runs through the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a small cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus that acts as the brain's internal timekeeper. When light hits your retinas, that signal travels up into the brain and tells the pineal gland to stop producing melatonin. When darkness falls, the signal reverses, and the pineal gland begins releasing melatonin into the bloodstream, telling every cell in your body that night has arrived, that it is time to repair, to regenerate, to consolidate memories, to fight inflammation, to slow the aging process. Melatonin is not simply a sleep hormone. That description, while accurate, is embarrassingly incomplete. Melatonin is one of the most potent antioxidants the human body produces. It crosses both the blood-brain barrier and the mitochondrial membrane, getting into places that most other antioxidants cannot reach. It protects neurons from oxidative damage. It regulates the immune system. It has been shown in laboratory studies to have anti-tumor properties, slowing the growth of certain cancer cells. It influences the secretion of other hormones, including estrogen and cortisol. It plays a role in mood regulation so significant that disruptions in its production have been linked to depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. And it governs circadian rhythm, that 24-hour biological cycle that sits underneath virtually every physiological function in your body, like a foundation beneath a house. When the pineal gland calcifies, its output of melatonin drops. Not immediately, not catastrophically, but gradually, measurably, consistently. Calcified tissue cannot secrete the way healthy tissue does. The pinealocytes, the secretory cells that actually produce melatonin, get crowded out and damaged by the accumulating mineral deposits. Imaging studies have confirmed this. Blood tests in people with heavily calcified pineal glands show lower nighttime melatonin levels. And when your melatonin is low, the downstream consequences ripple outward into nearly every system in your body. Your sleep becomes fragmented and less restorative. Your immune function weakens. Your inflammatory load increases. Your risk of neurodegenerative disease climbs. Your aging accelerates. This is not speculation. This is what the literature says consistently across multiple countries and multiple decades of research. The systematic review published in 2026, synthesizing literature from 2018 to 2025, concluded that calcification of the pineal gland is biologically plausible as a driver of functional consequences, with associations documented across sleep disturbance, neurodegeneration, psychiatric disorders, vascular disease, and altered endocrine function. A meta-analysis from 2023, pulling together studies from across the globe, put the pooled prevalence of pineal gland calcification in the adult human population at 61.65%. That means that right now, in this moment, More than 6 out of every 10 adults on Earth have detectable calcium deposits forming in the organ responsible for regulating their most fundamental biological rhythms. So where does the calcification come from? This is where the science gets genuinely interesting, and where the gap between what is known and what is communicated to the public becomes difficult to explain charitably. The first and most honest answer is age. The pineal gland calcifies as a natural part of aging. Scientists call the deposits corporas arenacea, which translates from Latin as brain sand. They begin forming in early childhood and accumulate steadily over the course of a lifetime. In this sense, some calcification is considered physiological, meaning it is a normal biological process rather than a disease. But calling something physiological does not mean it is harmless. Hair loss is physiological. Atherosclerosis develops physiologically. The body doing something regularly does not mean the body is doing something right. The second answer is more controversial, and it involves a chemical called fluoride. Jennifer Luke was a researcher at the University of Surrey in the United Kingdom. In the late 1990s, she published what became a landmark paper in the Journal of Pineal Research. What she found was startling. The human pineal gland, she discovered, accumulates fluoride at rates higher than any other organ in the body, higher even than bone, which is the tissue we typically think of as the primary storage site for fluoride. The reason is structural. The pineal gland sits outside the blood-brain barrier, which means it has unusually high exposure to whatever chemicals are circulating in the bloodstream. It is also extraordinarily well vascularized for its size, meaning blood flows through it at a high rate, continuously exposing it to trace chemicals in the blood. And fluoride, it turns out, has a very strong chemical affinity for hydroxyapatite, the mineral crystal that forms the calcification deposits inside the pineal gland. Fluoride essentially slots into the hydroxyapatite crystal structure, displacing hydroxyl ions, and in doing so, it amplifies and accelerates the calcification process. Luke measured fluoride concentrations in calcified pineal tissue and found levels that averaged 9,000 milligrams per kilogram. For comparison, the fluoride levels in bone typically range from 500 to 2,000 milligrams per kilogram. The pineal gland's fluoride concentration was 4 to 18 times higher than bone, and the correlation between fluoride concentration and the amount of calcification present was strong, statistically significant, and consistent. Now here is where you need to hold two things in your mind at the same time, because both of them are true and they are in tension with each other. The first is that this research is real, peer-reviewed, and has been replicated. The fluoride accumulation in the pineal gland is a documented scientific fact. The second is that the jump from fluoride accumulates in the pineal gland to the government is deliberately calcifying your pineal gland through water fluoridation requires several logical leaps that the evidence does not fully support. Water fluoridation in most countries, including the United States, is maintained at a concentration of 0.7 milligrams per liter. This is a very low dose. The studies showing the strongest links between fluoride and calcification and between fluoride and cognitive effects have largely come from MEWIS, regions where naturally occurring fluoride levels are 2, 3, or even 10 times higher than what you find in fluoridated municipal water. Iran, India, China, parts of Africa. In these high fluoride regions, the evidence of harm is considerably stronger and the pineal calcification findings are more pronounced. However, and this is a critical however, in January of 2025, a meta-analysis published in JAMA Pediatrics synthesized more than 70 epidemiological studies on fluoride and IQ in children. The conclusion was significant. There was an inverse association between fluoride exposure and children's IQ, meaning more fluoride, lower IQ scores. More troublingly, this association persisted even when the analysis was restricted to studies from regions where fluoride levels were below 1.5 milligrams per liter, the World Health Organization's guideline limit. This was not expected. This moved the goalposts on what had previously been considered a safe threshold. Also in 2024, the National Toxicology Program of the United States completed a comprehensive, systematic review of fluoride and neurodevelopment. They reviewed the highest quality studies available. 18 out of 19 of those studies showed an inverse association between fluoride, exposure, and children's IQ scores. The effect size was described as moderate. The NTP's findings were significant enough that they were cited by public health decision makers and triggered serious debate within the scientific and regulatory community. And yet water fluoridation policy in most developed countries has remained largely unchanged. Major dental and public health organizations continue to advocate for it. They are not wrong that fluoride prevents tooth decay. The evidence on that question is strong and consistent. But the question of whether a policy that protects teeth while potentially impacting neurological development and pineal gland function represents an acceptable trade-off is a question that deserves to be asked openly, honestly, and without dismissing the people asking it as conspiracy theorists, the pineal gland also accumulates other environmental chemicals. Heavy metals, including lead, mercury, and cadmium, have been detected in calcified pineal tissue. Some researchers have found traces of organochlorine compounds, the class of chemicals that includes many older pesticides. The pineal gland, because of where it sits in the brain and how it interfaces with the bloodstream, is essentially a filter. It is constantly exposed to whatever chemical load the modern human body is carrying. And the modern human body is carrying a great deal. The rising prevalence of calcification in younger and younger people may not be unrelated to the rising chemical complexity of the modern environment. Calcification has been detected in the pineal glands of adolescents. Some researchers have found it in children under 10, whether these early deposits represent a meaningful functional loss. Whether the gland retains enough secretory capacity in the early stages of calcification to maintain adequate melatonin production is still being studied. But the trend is not reassuring. There is another dimension to this story that almost nobody in the mainstream medical conversation acknowledges, and it is the one that gave the pineal gland its most evocative name, the third eye. The philosopher Descartes called the pineal gland the seat of the soul. He believed it was the single point in the brain where the mind and the body interfaced, where thought became action and experience became consciousness. He was ridiculed for this in his own time and has been largely dismissed on this particular point ever since. But Descartes was noticing something that modern neuroscience has begun to take seriously from a different angle. The pineal gland is, in a very literal anatomical sense, a vestigial photoreceptor. In many reptiles and fish, the pineal gland is directly light sensitive. It contains the same photoreceptive proteins found in the retina. In humans, the direct photosensitivity has been lost over evolutionary time, but the pineal gland retains structural homology with the eye. It contains rods and cones. It produces the same photopigments. From a developmental biology perspective, the pineal gland and the eye are deeply related structures. Some researchers have also noted that the pineal gland appears to be capable of producing dimethyltryptamine, DMT, a compound that in higher doses produces profound alterations in consciousness and is found across virtually every culture's history of spiritual experience in one form or another. The DMT research is preliminary and contested, and we should be careful not to overstate it. But the chemistry is real. The enzymes required to synthesize DMT from tryptophan are present in pineal tissue. Whether the gland actually produces physiologically significant amounts of DMT under normal conditions or only under extreme stress conditions, such as near-death experiences, is a question that remains genuinely open. What this means, if the research eventually confirms it, is that the pineal gland may play a role not just in circadian rhythm, but in the quality and depth of conscious experience itself. That is a profound claim. It is also a claim that ancient spiritual traditions across the world, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Sufism, and many others, have been making for thousands of years, long before the neuroscience to support it existed. The idea of a third eye, of a spiritual center of perception located in the middle of the brain, eye is not a New Age invention. It is one of the oldest recurring ideas in human religious history. That mainstream science is now catching up to it. Slowly, grudgingly, one careful paper at a time, is not entirely surprising to people who have been paying attention. Now, all of this brings us back to the original question. Is your pineal gland being calcified on purpose? The honest answer is, probably not in the way that most conspiracy theories frame it, but the situation is troubling enough that the conspiracy theories are understandable. Here is what we can say with confidence. The chemicals most strongly associated with pineal calcification, particularly fluoride, are chemicals that human beings are deliberately and systematically exposed to through public health programs. The decision to fluoridate water was made in the 1940s and 1950s, based on evidence that was available at the time. The evidence available now is considerably more complex. Regulatory agencies have been slow to update their guidelines in response to that new evidence. The institutions that should be asking the hardest questions about fluoride and neurological health are the same committed to water fluoridation as policy for decades, which creates an obvious conflict of interest in terms of their willingness to revise their position. The conspiracy theory version of this story, that shadowy elites deliberately added fluoride to the water supply to suppress human consciousness and prevent spiritual awakening, is almost certainly not what happened. The more likely explanation is mundane and in some ways more disturbing. Public health decisions made with good intentions and incomplete data, calcified into policy before the science could catch up, defended long after the science began to complicate the picture, with the financial and institutional interests of large organizations making course correction politically difficult. That is not a conspiracy. That is just how institutions work. It is how science interacts with policy. It is how the slow momentum of bureaucratic inertia resists change even when the evidence calls for it. And it is why millions, People are walking around with calcified pineal glands, disrupted melatonin production, fragmented sleep, elevated inflammatory markers, and a vague sense that something is wrong with their body that they cannot quite name. What can you actually do? Because that question matters more than any of the theoretical ones. The first thing to understand is that the evidence for fully reversing established pineal calcification, actually dissolving the existing mineral deposits, is weak. What you can do is reduce further accumulation and support the gland's function despite existing calcification. Those are meaningful goals even if they fall short of the dramatic decalcify your third eye language that circulates online. If you are concerned about fluoride exposure, the most effective intervention is a reverse osmosis water filtration system. These systems remove approximately 90 to 95% of fluoride from tap water, along with a broad range of other contaminants. They are available for under $200 for a countertop unit and under $500 for an undersink installation. Switching to a fluoride-free toothpaste is a lower stakes but still meaningful step. Hydroxyapatite-based toothpastes, available from brands including Boca and Risewell, use the same mineral that comprises natural tooth enamel to protect teeth. The research on their effectiveness against tooth decay is solid. You're not choosing between dental health and pineal health when you use them. Reducing artificial light exposure at night is probably the single highest impact behavioral change you can make to support pineal gland function, regardless of its calcification status. The gland's melatonin signal is exquisitely sensitive to light. Even a moderate amount of blue spectrum light from phone and computer screens in the hour before sleep can significantly suppress melatonin output. Blackout curtains, blue light blocking glasses, and setting your devices to night mode or simply turning them off earlier in the evening are all tools that work. They are free or nearly free, and the evidence supporting them is robust. Adequate sleep in a dark, cool room allows the pineal gland to do its best work with whatever secretory capacity it retains. Chronic sleep deprivation compounds the functional loss caused by calcification. It is damage layered on top of damage. Treating sleep as a biological priority rather than a luxury is not soft advice. It is the most evidence-based thing most people can do to support their overall health, and it directly supports pineal function. Some researchers have discussed the potential of certain supplements in supporting the antioxidant pathways that protect pinealocytes from further damage. Melatonin supplementation itself is worth discussing with a physician, particularly for people who struggle with sleep and are in the age range, where calcification is likely already present. Magnesium, iodine, and boron have all been discussed in the context of decalcification, though the direct human clinical evidence for their effects on pineal calcification specifically is not yet strong enough to make firm recommendations. The broader evidence for their roles in supporting neurological health is more established. Removing heavy metals from the diet and environment, reducing consumption of a high mercury fish, avoiding food and water contact with lead-containing materials, being thoughtful about occupational chemical exposures, supports not just pineal health, but the health of every organ in the body. And sunlight, real natural sunlight, particularly in the morning, is the most ancient and reliable way to keep your circadian system well calibrated. Exposing your eyes and skin to morning light anchors the brain's master clock, tells the pineal gland when day has begun, and sets up the melatonin release that will come that night. This is not mysticism. This is circadian biology. The research is unambiguous. Getting outside in the morning, even for 10 or 15 minutes, has measurable effects on nighttime melatonin production and sleep quality. Here is what this entire story ultimately comes down to. You have a gland in the center of your brain that produces one of the most important hormones your body makes. The gland is calcifying in the majority of adults, increasingly in adolescents and even children. One at rates that correlate with measurable reductions in melatonin, measurable increases in sleep disturbance, and documented associations with Alzheimer's disease, psychiatric illness, and vascular disease. The chemicals most strongly associated with accelerating that calcification are chemicals that humans are systematically exposed to through deliberate public policy decisions. The institutions responsible for those policies have been slow to respond to accumulating evidence of harm, and the people most affected by all of this have largely not been told about it by their doctors, because pineal gland calcification is not something most physicians discuss in routine care. Whether that constitutes a conspiracy depends on how you define the word. It is not a secret. The research is published in open access journals, peer-reviewed, available to anyone who looks for it. But the gap between what the science says and what the average person knows about the organ sitting in the center of their brain, quietly hardening, is a gap that should concern everyone who believes that people deserve to make informed decisions about their own health and their own bodies. The pineal gland is real. Its calcification is real. The consequences are real. The questions being asked about it deserve real answers. And you deserve to know that this is happening inside you, right now, and that there are things you can do about it, and that the story of why it is happening is more complicated, more important, and more urgent than either the mainstream dismissal or the conspiracy framing has been willing to acknowledge.